Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I will be providing a book cover comparison video where I compare various book covers of favorite fantasy series that I've read, and I will discuss which covers I like more and which covers I like less. I have 4 different series to talk about today, and so I'll compare various covers that are part of those series. So the first series I'll talk about is The Lord of the Rings. I own a couple of editions of Lord of the Rings, not as many as some friends of mine, but I have a few. One of the editions, I don't know why they had this edition, because I cannot imagine them ever reading this. But when my grandparents were selling their house several years ago, I want to say this was like 2015 or 2016, we were going through all of their books in their basement, and they sold us, whatever you want, you can take, because we're just, getting rid of everything to sell the house. And I found this edition of The Lord of the Rings. It is the movie tie-in edition. I got that image from Fellowship on there, and it's got some, a nice spine and wraparound on the back, and it's got a really smooth, spine here, which means either one of two things: either it holds up well, or it's just not been read. And I think it's actually both. These types of spines do hold up fairly well, but it's also, I'm pretty sure this has never been read. So I'm actually I really enjoy this, despite the fact that I'm not a fan of movie covers for my books. I don't like the movie tie-in editions, but this one, it's still pretty nice because it doesn't look like a movie poster and rather just has the writer. It's still nice. This is from Houghton Mifflin. I also have another Houghton Mifflin edition, which is the nice trade paperback bind-up version. It's got the just very simplistic artwork, which I typically prefer actual artwork, but this is, I think, actual J.R.R. Tolkien design, which is pretty cool, and it's pretty heavy. Both of these, the nice thing is they look nice. It's a nice, full edition of the whole trilogy. The problem with these books is that they're heavy. They're very heavy, and so they're kind of ponderous to read. It's like reading the trade paperbacks of the Stormlight Archive. They're ponderous. But this series, it's still a nice look for your shelves, and if you were reading in public, it would look nice. But the final editions I have are mass markets. I have not been able to find, so I have mass markets of Two Towers and Return of the King. And Return of the King, this cover is just gorgeous. This is my favorite Lord of the Rings cover that I own. The image of Gandalf on the horse riding to Minas Tirith perfectly resembles the movie. I don't know if this cover came out before the movie or after the movie or what, or if it was made from concept art, but this is just gorgeous artwork and feels exactly how I feel Minas Tirith reads. And I just thought this was a gorgeous cover. And then this one, it's still the Rocky cover, but it matches the design of this one, so I actually still quite like the Two Towers. And the only reason I have the mass market of Fellowship is because when I decided, I did a podcast years ago where I read through the trilogy with a friend of mine, and I was just realizing reading these heavy trade paperbacks at the time was not feasible for me. I think I could do it now, but I was a new reader at the time, and so I just went out to a bookstore and found this for like $2 or $1, and so just picked it up because it was a mass market, and this one has the movie cover, which I don't really like this cover edition. It's more beat up, but I really just don't like it because it feels more movie-ish. Like, at least this one, it's movie-ish, but it's more ominous movie-ish. This one, it's like literally like a still from the movie in the back. The images they chose are still pretty good, but regardless, it's not the best. And just dropped something. So I still think of the Lord of the Rings, my favorite cover is the Return of the King version, which this is just gorgeous. So those are my Lord of the Rings comparisons. Let me instead move to talking about the Assassin's Apprentice series. I've only read the first book in the series, but I've bought the whole trilogy in one version, and then I have 2 of the books in another. So I have the version, I read the first book, Assassin's Apprentice, in this version, and then I bought the sequel right after I read it. And this was one of the first book reviews I ever did for the channel. This was back in August 2021 that I read it. And I really enjoyed it. I didn't love the series; it's not a favorite, but it was an entertaining read. And I bought the second one, and for some reason, I just haven't gotten around to the second one. I think it's because when I saw that it was a tome, I was like, I only want to read tomes if I really want to read them, and I kept putting it off. But then I found these versions at the local bookstore. I found this version of Assassin's Apprentice, which has the beautiful Michael Whalen cover. Not my favorite Michael Whalen cover, but still a very well done one. And then I actually like this one better, the Royal Assassin one. I think this is a much more my style from Michael Whalen. And then the third book, this is where it gets interesting. This one is not Michael Whalen. This one is actually Stephen Ewell, who does a lot of sci-fi fantasy book covers. And I like this cover even better than the other two. Maybe it's because it's got a dragon on there, but I really like these covers. And this will be a theme that you'll see throughout this video is I like that kind of classic 90s feel to my covers. I want it to feel like, really fantastical and feel like a painting. And this one, I'll admit, it's still well produced. Like, at least the books are, connected and seem natural. But the problem I have with these covers is they look, particularly this one, look way too realistic. They look too photogenic. They look too much like a photograph and a guy posed for them like romance novels, as opposed to a beautiful tapestry of artwork for a fantasy novel. So I much more give the edge to the Robin Hood or to the OG covers, but I actually really prefer Assassin's Quest the most of the OG covers. So if you have a different opinion, let me know in the comments section down below. Next, I have the Shannara, which I've talked about these a little bit, but I actually read Shannara with this cover, which I still really enjoy, and I believe that my enjoyment of this cover is purely because this is the first fantasy book I read on my own, and it's also this is the first copy of a fantasy book for me, so it has that special nostalgia to me. I wasn't a big fantasy book fan, so I didn't know fantasy that well, but you have the little character who I believe is Shay Omsford, and he's standing before the towers and the castle that appears to be Paranor, and it's got the nice wraparound, and it's got a really good blurb on the back, and I love this book, and I still think it's a solid cover, but then you compare it to some of the others, and I will show for comparison. This is the Wish Song cover, which shows someone hiding, which I believe is Al-Anon, and you have the Mord Wraiths, and you kind of got the mist, and it actually stylistically kind of matches together, so they got that at least. But let's look at the OG covers. The OG covers include the Sword of Shannara with the two brothers. Let me find their names. The brothers Hildebrandt, who did all the artwork inside as well. And those guys did a terrific job with the interior artwork. They did a great job with the exterior artwork. The cover art, I think, unfortunately, the only problem I have with this one is it actually looks, these two in particular, look a little bit too 3D, and so it actually looks almost like claymation when you look at it up close. And so on that sense, I don't necessarily love it as much, but I still like it as a piece of art better than the other cover. And then you have Elfstones and Wish Song of Shannara, which I think are gorgeous cover arts, both of them by Darrell K. Sweet. And Darrell K. Sweet is my favorite cover artist. These are not my favorite covers of him, but he's my favorite cover artist because of his work on the Wheel of Time, because of his work in Rune Lords, and many other places. But these two covers I think are really good. I think the best cover is Elfstones, and Wish Song is also very solid covers. And then the final cover I have is the 35th anniversary edition that has the annotations. And having the annotations is pretty nice because whenever I reread it, I will read for the annotations. But they really buried the lead with this cover because they have a full print inside looking type thing. This image is also in, I think, some of the other books, but when you take the cover off, you see this cover art of the company. I don't know what you would call this, the company of the quest for the sword of Shanara, or the company of Alanon, or the company of Sheomsford. Whatever you'd say, this is that image, and it is gorgeous. And this should have been the cover. Like, you put the writing up, you make this the cover. Maybe, alter it a little bit, but you put the writing up here, and then maybe put, by so, that's your cover art, man. Why y'all are just shooting yourselves in the foot, not using the good stuff. So that's a little bit frustrating, but still a nice addition. I still think the best cover art for Shannara is this version of the classic version, but particularly I think Elfstone's has the best of that cover art. But for some reason, because of the nostalgia, this one will always have a special place in my heart, because it's the first fantasy book I read, and it's the first edition of a fantasy book. You can even see the kind of black it's gotten from my fingerprints being all over the pages. So finally, I have saved my most intriguing position for last, and that is the Song of Ice and Fire, aka Game of Thrones books that I own. I have 2 editions of these, so let me start with the editions that I actually read. I'm starting with these editions, and you start with the first book, which is A Game of Thrones, which is just the sword. Now, a lot of people would have this type of edition, but with the blue coloring, but it has the throne in the background from the show, which is actually a quite solid cover. And I still think this one works well with the others in this group. The best thing that this batch of books has is consistency. The consistency of the design of the covers. So you have A Game of Thrones. Then you have the second book, A Clash of Kings, which, as I think about it, still is, I rated it too low. And then I have A Storm of Swords, which is also very good. The book I liked the least, but the cover is fine, is A Feast for Crows. And then you have A Dance with Dragons. And all 5 of these, they match. They all look nice together on a shelf. That's the consistency. Then you have the kind of, I don't know if these are all OG covers, but they're certainly older editions. And I actually went to the used bookstore, and specifically not the big one that I go to, the small one, the one that's run by a single guy. And I went there the day that he had gotten these in stock. And he and I were talking, and I snatched them up, and he had them for a good price. And he knew what they were worth. He knew they were worth a lot of money. He didn't want to charge that much for them, so he just charged, basic paperback price. So I snatched them up, and I said, thank you. So these are all from Bantam. You have A Game of Thrones, which has Ned Stark, well, it's either Ned Stark, or this could be, why can't I think of his name? Jon Snow. Maybe this is Jon Snow, but I feel like Ed Stark is the better fit for this book. And then you've got Winterfell, which actually looks a lot like I'd envisioned Winterfell, and not exactly how the show envisions it, but still really good. And you got the snow. It's all just a nice cover, and you can actually see kind of the outline of the throne there. And I prefer. This was a common thing in the 80s and 90s, where they would basically take the painting and basically only cut out a snippet of a painting and make the rest of it blank and for the words. And I'm like, just make the whole thing a painting. You don't need to have this kind of grayish material. Make the whole thing painting, put sky up here, put snow down here. That would have been beautiful. But that's unfortunately not what they did. And this one, the spine's not broken, which is a rare find with used books. And then I have Clash of Kings, which when I first read this, when I first saw this cover, I thought, is that Joffrey? No, that's not Joffrey. That's Stannis, I believe. And you have the Red Woman, and you also have someone bowing before him, which I believe is the Onion Knight Sir Davos. But maybe I'm wrong. But still, I just think this is also a very nice, well done cover. Gets the point across. And then you have the third one, which I think this is the weakest because I think it's the cheesiest cover, and that's A Storm of Swords. Now, this cover is in the same design, the little cutout painting, but for some reason, the knight's armor for this knight, as well as, there's a casket, and it has something draped over it. And the red and blue striped on that combined with the knight, it looks cheesy. It looks like if you describe to someone who didn't read fantasy what a fantasy cover, like you said, I need a knight on my thing, and you think of the like cheesy, not even Monty Python cheesy, like super cheesy, just oh, this is what a knight looks like. Just the colorful armor. It just screams cheesiness to me. Now the woman there, nice design, soldier there. Even that knight looks okay. But I just felt this was just the weirdest decision for the design. And so even though I love paintings and I love paintings of artwork for my books, I would actually give a little edge to this one because as far as I understand, there do not exist editions with this style art for A Feast for Crows and for A Dance with Dragons. They don't have those. As far as I understand, the only version we have is like this one for A Feast for Crows, or maybe the movie tie-in version. But certainly not that version. So it looks, I'd have to do something like this, and that just looks inconsistent. So unfortunately for my shelf space, I actually, like, if I ever, I'm not at this point yet, but if I ever have to say display one, not the other, I would actually give the edge to this version because it's all consistent. And so that's just an interesting, fascinating discussion that I think can be had. So let me know in the comments which versions and editions you like of these and which ones you don't. And do you prefer the minimalistic style? Do you prefer full artwork? Do you prefer kind of a blend? What are your thoughts? Leave all those thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.